Hello, beautiful people. Hope you all are doing so well on this first Monday of spring. And it's such a pleasure to be here with the amazing Sarah Poet to continue our series on raising self-aware teens. And today's topic is teens and self-love. And definitely feeling a little vulnerable and nervous about this topic, which is kind of exciting. And just want to ask for a blessing on this conversation, that may it be in service of all sentient beings, and may it be in service of ourselves and each other and the children in our lives and anyone that may hear these words. So
thank you, Andrew. I am partially over here on Facebook making sure that everything is set up, and I'm listening to you and I'm hearing that you feel a little vulnerable about this conversation. So thanks for showing up and being willing to be authentic in front of the world. And yeah, when we lead with our heart, things happen, good things happen. So thank you for being here. We have this like quote board on our refrigerator, and the quote is this week, like, when I show up in a brave and authentic way, good things happen. And I quoted myself. We thought that was funny. I was quoting myself on the refrigerator this week. But yeah, it's true. I mean, without the vulnerability and the authenticity, which has so much to do with this conversation anyway, because it's what the world kind of knocks out of us. Here we are having these conversations as educators and as parents. And in previous weeks, we've been talking about the school systems, and that wasn't really a place where you could just go and be yourself and, be really authentic and just be with whatever's going on. There's not a lot of time for that, like social, emotional processing and learning in most schools. And so, we don't have models for this. And so even by showing up here and just naming, like, I feel vulnerability and I'm showing up anyway, I mean, that's modeling a new kind of conversation and a new kind of leadership. So thank you so much for doing that. Yeah.
I guess the first thing I want to name is that I think it's super clear to me, and I suspect you, but I'll let you speak for yourself, that emotional and social intelligences are the most important thing to cultivate in teens, and that intrapersonal understanding and interpersonal understanding and wisdom are the most important ingredients for living a fulfilling life. And it's just interesting that, given the importance of these things, that our systems aren't really set up to deal with them in a meaningful way. And so if we recognize that these are the most important things, then the question is, how do we go about cultivating these things in our young people? Mm-hmm. And I've been pondering this question and living this question and seeking to embody this question for a long time as an educator, and feel like I'm getting closer and closer to the heart of the matter of the importance of these issues.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly. There's a beautiful book that changed my life as an educator, and I recommend for parents to read it too, called How Children Succeed. And Paul Tough is the author. Have you read that book? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I read it probably 10 years ago or when it first came out. And I mean, research will show that it is character-based education and not academics that makes the human. Or not necessarily just character education, but that true social and emotional learning about character and value and who you are. And those are the components that, traditional school has not included. So if you go, I like to kind of go macro and then micro and look at like what's going on in the collective and what's going on in each of us. And we've talked before in other episodes of our series about this like factory model of education, and that model of, when education was formulated in our culture, and what the values were culturally at that time were, based in individualism and independence, and going out, and going through the system, and then getting the job, and then, going through the cultural expectations of things like, you know, um, men had certain jobs that they typically did, women had certain jobs that they typically did. There were marriages, there were houses, there were families, and so we've been in a change and I'll say a breakdown of that culture, that expectation, and we're craving authenticity as humans. And so here we have, I know you want to talk about this today, like we have all of these adults who kind of came up in that kind of system. And the children are, in my opinion, in the remnants of that system. Like our current education system, I think, is breaking down and changing, maybe by necessity or desire, if people choose. But we have young people who we want them to stay connected to their authenticity. I hope so. I hope we want that. And they want to stay connected to their authenticity. But it's interesting because, previous generations went through this, I'll say, system that squashed individualism and vulnerability and authenticity, or not individualism, but like, there was, to clarify, there was a pressure to be very, very independent, right? Like succeed on your own, sort of disconnected from community, but not authentic individualism. Like it didn't call for that. And so here we're talking about how to raise young people to know their authentic self and to have self-love, and to have all of these social and emotional skills, when to be totally honest, most of the adults in their life probably don't have them.
Right. So that's the challenge,
Yeah.
is that we see an ideal and the adults are working to embody these truths in their own lives at various levels of success. And then we have young people that are growing up both with their parental models, parental modeling, adult modeling, and in the systems of which you speak. And so as we talk about this need for teens to cultivate self-love, to me, it comes down first and foremost to the adults in their lives that are willing to take that journey themselves and to do the work and to humble themselves and be vulnerable about the work that they're doing, right? Because this idea that we have it all figured out and that we're going to communicate it to kids, we're going to stand in front of class and say, this is the way things are. It's never jived with me. I've always believed in a seminar style of education where we are all in the field together. And particularly when we're talking about being human beings, that it's important that we cultivate a space where we are all equals as human beings. And we sit down in sacred council with each other. And you might have as much to, I might have as much to learn from you as you have to learn from me. And so just creating those spaces, whether we're talking about parents with their kids or educators with individuals or group of kids, creating spaces, might call it something like a mysteries council, right? Where, hey, we're sitting at the table of life here and we're going to bring our authentic problems and challenges and be vulnerable with each other in this space, and trust that this is a container that can hold that, and that we can hold each other in the process of growth.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really admire about you, Andrew, because like you have a huge brain and you have a PhD, and you're like one of the biggest thinkers that I know. And Andrew and I know one another personally and have for years. And so, but there's this humility. And I know that you ran Aspire High with this humility and having kids sit in a circle, right? Instead of like desks and chairs and you all face me and listen to me because I have it figured out. No, like we're investigating life together, and you matter here. I actually just got chills when I was saying that and thinking that. And I remember, I don't know if it was like, I don't know if it was different for you in your early years of education. It was for me because I was young. I was working with teenage males to begin. So I was like 5 years older than some of them. It was wild to be in that situation. And but the pressure is like, be an authority. Like if you're a teacher or a parent, you should be the authority. You should have it figured out. And what a relief over the years of like letting that go and standing in front of classes and being like, we're investigating, and I don't have to have all of the answers in me to all of your questions. Was it different when you first started as an educator? Did you like want to have
Oh,
all the
yes. I was
Yeah.
22 when I first started and just figuring things out. All the desks were in rows because that's the way they were lined up for me.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to figure out that really every space I educate in, I want it to be a circle,
Yeah.
right? And then it took a while to grow out of the insecurity of, can I both set the perimeter and actually be the one that is guiding the space, holding the space, and at the same time be vulnerable about what I don't know and what I'm working through, right?
It's
And
the
that's
most
been like,
beautiful thing. I wish that for everyone. It's so funny and amazing, like in the groups that I hold now with adults too. It's like we're questing. I mean, this is like new territory that we're in as a culture, as humanity. And so, I want to create these spaces with young people where we sit around and we talk about what they see, right? Because I can talk about masculine, feminine, and gender dynamics like in, the 35 to 55 age range that I usually work with. But then it's like there are these young people coming in, they've already got so much more figured out than I do, like knowing in my 40 years, like they're coming in with fresh information and knowledge and insight. And they don't have all the baggage that we have. They're coming in to help create the new world. And so yeah, giving them that space to be themselves.
there's a specific practice for the cultivation of self-love that I've come to believe is really important in both working with teens and parents of teens, right? Because when you're working with children, you're also working with their parents, right? The parental dynamic. And the this the big challenge for parents is projection and transference, projection of their own issues and then transferring their own issues to their teens, because
Yeah,
these young people.
let's describe those a little bit more in case people are new to
Yeah.
those words. Yeah, go ahead.
So the projecting of my own inadequacies onto my teen, right? My struggles, right? And then the transferring of those struggles into the team because they see that happening or they experience it happening. And so
Mhm.
often their issues become our issues because of the way that we project our issues onto them,
hmm Yeah,
right?
another example of transference would be like if I'm having an issue, I'm just going to say with you, right? And like something happens between us, and you're an adult male in my life, and so I have an issue with you, and then that issue I turn around and snap at my kid, right? Like that's just it's a transference of an emotional dynamic that had nothing to do with the child.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
And so what I'm discovering personally and with the other adults that I'm talking to about issues they're having with their teens is that really the key work is going back to that moment in our own life, right? Going back to that time period in our own life. Say my child's 13. Like, can I go back to my 13-year-old self
Mm.
and really attempt to relive the challenges I faced at that time for two reasons. One, to have a deeper sense of understanding, but more importantly, to recognize that the wounded self in me from those years is getting projected out onto my teen, right? And so unless I heal my own teenage wounds, or then I'm not going to have the capacity uh, to be able to help the teen through that. Or I would say this, that unless I'm at least aware of the traumas and hurt that I felt as a teen, I will unconsciously just send it along to somebody else, right? It's not that we have to fix ourselves, right? It's just be aware of, ooh, I struggled with enormous insecurity as a 13-year-old. And I remember feeling just completely lost in the peer groups and inadequate physically, and just really like reliving that so that I don't just pass that right along. And I think that's where this idea of a mystery council, where you can actually bring these vulnerabilities to the young people and give them information about the struggles that you face, so that they can then start to see, oh, that thing that that person felt, they're actually giving that to me right now. I mean, these people, you know, when they get to be 14, 15, 16 years old, they have some pretty powerful powers of observation and reflection, and they are seeing it and knowing it, not always able to articulate it, but they are certainly seeing it and knowing it at some level. And so creating, again, this level space, right, which requires the humbling, again, of the adult in the space to come down to the level, right, and share openly and vulnerably about challenges that are current real challenges and past challenges as a young person, which are showing up almost definitely in present challenges.
Right, right. Thank you. And that, I would imagine that that's the part that's vulnerable about today's conversation for you. Yeah,
You know,
thank you for sharing. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about some personal examples that I could share of how my own, our own walk always it, impacts, or mm, the word isn't coming to me, but I'll say impacts, our current relating. Like that's human life, right? And I was thinking about how I've worked in a lot of therapeutic education, and I worked in the schools where we were trying to look at holistic education, like really how do we, um, you know, reach the hearts and souls of these children. Those are my words, not necessarily the school's words. um, and like really encourage the whole child, right? We have these notions of whole child, whether or not we're actually like getting there with a lot of education, that's a different conversation. But I worked in these therapeutic schools, so the therapist would be there and the school would be there, like all in one place, and often it was a residential place so the kids lived there. We're also working with the families, right? And there is an expectation in education, and definitely in clinical therapy, to not share your story most of the time. I think there are exceptions that they make. And so I remember, you know, opportunities to use I'm actually going to give two examples of like using the same story. So when I was 18 years old, I got pregnant and carried the baby to term, but wasn't allowed, or was, you know, um, convinced, I'll say, that, that she should be adopted. And so I had this incredible experience of like becoming a mother at age 19 with no baby, right? So that impacted the rest of my life, probably impacted the reason I became teacher, probably impacted like everything, right? And I remember working in an all girls school, and my child's adoption is open. So we've always known one another. I chose her placement. Not everyone has that. So I was working in a therapeutic educational system with all girls, and many of those girls had been adopted and had trauma, like attachment trauma, etc., about being adopted. And I went to the therapist and I said, I think I can use my story to somehow help. Like, I want to collaborate with you. How can we therapeutically do this? They're all mad at their birth mothers. I'm a birth mother. Let's do something, right? Like we can be here in this. And the answer was, no, 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 no. Don't ever tell them. And the thought was that it would be way too complicated for these children, and that the transference would impact their transference onto me, and anger onto me would impact our relationship. Looking back, I think we could have handled it. I think it would have been really cool to like be able to interview a birth mother, or like, oh my gosh, I love this woman and she happens to be a birth mother, right? But that was like deterred. Then the same thing came up the other day when so same trigger, right, or same situation in my life, the adoption of my first child. We had the biggest, I'll say, blow up in my ex-husband and I had our biggest blow up in our co-parenting in 6 years. I think stuff that we've like just tried to, you know, manage, like energetically, was not going to happen anymore. And in the moment that my child went with him afterward, my brain went into complete fear of losing, like of losing contact, of losing, just losing, right? Because I had already lost a child. And so I'm recognizing that this is happening. It's not to say that I wasn't triggered in the moment, but I was talking to my child's therapist 2 days later, and I said, I don't know if you know this about me, but I have lost a child. And so that got triggered in my fear in the situation. And he saw that. And he said, what incredible vulnerability you have. What incredible, self-knowledge. Thank you so much for telling me. And we were able to talk with the child about that. Like, hey, I'm an adult and I love you. And our life is exactly as you think it is. And I got triggered right there. And so my behavior was informed by my own fear right there. And, I told his therapist, I was like, I talked about that in my TEDx talk. Like it's, I use this story in order to maybe just share the example. And so it's not incredibly vulnerable for me to share that. But I think it is vulnerable in our culture to share real story. And then my son, who's only 12, when he heard me say, the fear of loss, like loss of a child, is deep in my brain. And that's what got triggered when I saw you guys walking away together. And he gets it. He gets it. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, my mom lives with that, and because it's not under a rock, because I haven't buried it, then we can be with that truth, even though it's not a packaged and pretty truth, right? Like we have this societal pressure that it all look pretty. And we're saying, like, let's open it up to the not so pretty parts. And our children are equipped to be with that when we are being in a self-aware way. If we're in the trigger, that's not really fair to them. But if we are doing the work of going in and saying, whoa, what was that about? What in me was triggered right there? And then bringing that into authentic conversation with them, they can handle it.
They can. And the modeling of that is what creates the conditions for the growth that we're seeking our young people. So we set up these boundaries, and hierarchical boundaries, for good reasons. All right, parent-child. Okay, look, child's not capable of taking full authority, so we have this. Teacher, student, right? Therapist, patient, right? We set these up for a reason because there's one level at which that boundary and that hierarchy is a requirement, right? And we've talked about that on previous things. Like, parents also need to be able to say no, right? And that's a hierarchical thing, that's setting a boundary. And the deeper stuff happens, and we also set those up for safety, right? Teachers sometimes get too close with students, and they miss kind of like can all kinds of bad things can happen when the teacher acts as a friend to when the parent acts as just a friend to the child, or the teacher acts as just a friend to the student, or if the therapist is going back and forth. I mean, there's professional and personal and good logical reasons why we'd set these boundaries up. And the deeper stuff happens at the place where this can become this. And there is a danger. There is a danger when the hierarchy is not held. But that danger is the space where the beautiful things can happen. And it requires, like I said, that teacher who can both, I am still the teacher in this space, and I've set the chairs up like this. I'm starting the conversation. I'm going to conclude the conversation. And guess what? In the middle of that, I'm going to get to a space where I hope you don't feel like I'm above you, because I'm not. Right? So how to navigate those divides and to create that space is a true art. I mean, it really
So
is
much.
an art to I mean, we call it vulnerability for a reason, because when you're vulnerable, you can get hurt. And that's why, for instance, I'm not sharing all my vulnerabilities with everyone all the time. That's not wise, right? I get hurt like that. I need to choose when and how to be vulnerable. I can be vulnerable with myself at all times, in the sense of being aware enough to understand, oh, that's fear, that's sadness, that's anger. I'm with that. I'm present with those things. Now, what I choose to share in a moment with depends on who it is and what the context is and whether it feels safe. So, as parents and educators, there's this challenge of maintaining these dual roles. And I think it's just really important that we create space for authentic sharing. And I do think that if there is a maturity between that, if the teacher has the maturity, then absolutely they can share these personal things, because it is where the beautiful things would happen with your students, right? Is sharing that I have this, just like you talked about the beautiful things happening with your son when you share these vulnerable things. And so that's our invitation, I think, is to and our temptation is normally not to be vulnerable, because we can get hurt.
Right. And the pressure, the social pressure to have it together. And we're talking here about raising self-aware teens. That's the umbrella of why we're doing these 8 weeks of conversations. And, it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to raise a self-aware child if you yourself are not self-aware and modeling that self-awareness. I mean, if you are hoping that your child is going to grow up authentically, but you yourself are not, allowing yourself to be in that place of authenticity and realness. And my heart's going out to, women in my network who I've heard them say, I want to be more authentic with myself so that I can use my voice with my husband, so that my daughter grows up knowing exactly what she's actually feeling inside, because because I'm keeping it in for me, and I know that I'm modeling it for her, right? So I hear this all the time, actually. And so I definitely don't want to be emitting any sort of like shame, or no, I'm saying we're all on this human growth path together. And that self-awareness, and it can begin really small. It can begin with, like in the example I just used, saying, authentically, I'm having a hard time finding the words right now, or I need space right now, or I feel scared right now and I'd like to sit on the couch, would you like to sit with me? Right? And just modeling this, like, I don't know. And here we are in a pandemic. We've been in the pandemic for a year. All sorts of things are changing in the world. And maybe one of the most beautiful things is that we don't know much. Like there is much we do not know, in terms of exactly what will happen. And so I just tuned into that right now, thinking about the young people and that versatility and adaptability, and like, We just don't know. And we know that rates of anxiety and depression are going up. But what would it be like if we were just authentically able to be with the not knowing, authentically able to be with, like, I don't have it together all the time. Um, yeah, okay, we're going to have to be versatile in this moment. Um, I think that that's where true relationships are formed. That's where true community is formed. Um, and I just want to make sure that we touch on self-love just a little bit more, because that was like our topic of the day, and everything we've said has to do with that, but we haven't spoken directly to that. So I interviewed my 12-year-old while we were having a meal right before this, and I said, Andrew and I are about to talk about teens and self-love. And the first question I asked him was, what do you think is a way that young people and teenagers like really learn to love themselves? And he thought about it, and he was like, I don't know. And I said, I think I asked you the wrong question. I said, do you think that you're born loving yourself, and it's the world that would influence you to not love yourself? And he's like, that, totally, totally. So that the self-love is natural, and we want to keep it alive. We want to keep this flame alive of authenticity.
There's a beautiful practice that was just shared with me recently, and it was this. Well, just first a background. We are our company. Like the only one that I keep company with from the beginning to the end is me. And the comfort I have when I keep company with myself, and the comfort I have in my own skin, is the most important thing. And this practice is given to me by a man named Love Batista, who I admire very deeply. And he suggested, what's the first thing that you do every morning? And he said, what if you greeted yourself first thing when you wake up? And just as if you were greeting your beloved, right? And just greet yourself and say, nice to be here with you. And what if the last thing that you did before you went to bed was just thanked yourself for being your best today? Because we're all doing the best that we can. And just honored yourself for the ways that you showed up, or even the ways that you struggled, but just honored yourself for being here. And what if that practice of cultivating relationship with self was the first and last thing that we did each day, right? How much might that practice, and then the communication of that practice to young people from someone who's authentically living it, what impact might that have on young people to really like, oh, that's an interesting idea, I've never thought about that.
Mhm,
Right?
mhm.
I look in the mirror and all I see is what's wrong with me.
Yeah. Oftentimes that's the first thing that can happen in the early thoughts of the day. It's like, okay, what do I have to do? Where's my energy have to go? What didn't go right yesterday? Like, how am I broken? All of those kinds of things. And so yes, like first thing in the morning, um, a self practice, and I would even go so far as to say a self and sacred practice together. um, and so there's this technique that's very common in like shamanic practices or energy practices, where you call yourself back to yourself. And so at the end of the day, that's what my son and I do very oftentimes. And so I'll just share that a little bit here. Um, we work with the elements like water and wind. He likes to use wind. He's an Aquarius. He's an air sign, so he really feels. He can imagine the wind and feel it. And so at the end of the day, it's like stand there and feel the wind whipping at every part of your body, or feel the river on every part of your body, and it just takes away the heavy things, right? The things that somebody else said that stuck to you, the pressures, all of those things, and they're going away in the wind, going down the stream, and then you're lighter, right? But then you either focus on your heart or like a space above your head, and say your full name and call yourself home. I call myself back to myself across like everything, everywhere, all time, space, and dimension. Like I want me, right? And then you sleep in that energy. It's very powerful.
These are the
Thanks for the mention.
exact conversations to be having with groups of young people. Exactly what we just did, and then making space for everyone else to share, and sharing practices. Like this is the work that needs to be done. So thank you for doing it with just you and I on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are we concluding for today? Got
I'm
our half-hour
complete.
mark. Okay.
I'm complete.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks everyone for watching, and reach out to either of us if we can be of service to you and your family.
Blessings on your day.
You too. Bye.